With the help of Hashem, we're making now the Siyum on Masechtas Beitzah. We are starting on the Mishnah Daf Lamed Tes Amid Beis, 3 lines before the bottom of the Amid. We are still continuing to learn the theme that we began on Daf Lamed Zayin, that property that belongs to a person is bound by the tchum of that person, and we will apply it when it comes to the following. Let's say, think about this. You live here in this village. Your produce, just as an example, your fruit, your grain, your kugel is in a village that's beyond your tchum. You didn't make an eruv, you can't even get to it. But you have it in the house of your chavod over there in the other village. Your friend made an eruv tchumen. Your friend is allowed to walk to you. Can your friend bring you your kugel? No. That's the rule. Since the kugel belongs to the owner, the kugel cannot go where the owner can't go. It's as if when Yom Tov came in, the kugel already went beyond the tchum. Now, what did we learn in Eruvin? If I'm bound by, we are all bound by the tchum. If I, by accident, if I walked outside of the tchum, what happens to me? I'm stuck there until the end of Shabbos and Yom Tov. No, it's that produce began Yom Tov already outside the tchum. And many other nuances of examples of consequences of the rule that things that belong to me are bound by my tchum. The big topic that we will have on Daf Mem will be, how do we view a custodian? We learned before that ownership doesn't have to mean ownership. If I borrowed something from you before Yom Tov, it's going to be bound to my tchum, because it doesn't belong to me, but while I have it borrowed, it belongs to me. It's under my control. What happens if I'm only a custodian? So, do we say that the custodian is the owner? Or do we say no, that the owner is the owner? The custodian is only a shomer. That is a machlokes between Rav and Shmuel. Rav holds that the tchum will be of the custodians, of the shomer. Shmuel will hold that it belongs to the mafket, to the owner. And we're going to go back and forth trying to understand what is the machlokes between Rav and Shmuel. And the final Mishnah that we will have in Beitzah on Daf Mem Amud Aleph, it's a small daf, is going to be the differentiation between two types of animals. One type of animal is called range animals. Range animals means midbariyos. Midbariyos are animals that they pasture freely outside the city. We will see when do they return. But if they are considered range animals, they are muktzah, which means you can't shech them, even though you own them. But they were outside of your mind. You did not have in mind to use them on Yom Tov. If they are bayosois, if they are domesticated animals, then like the din of the animals, you are allowed to shech from them from Yom Tov. This is going to quickly go back to Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon. How broadly, how narrowly do we apply muktzah? And when we finish, we're going to learn a few words of the Rebbe that we have in Toras Menachem from Tafshin Yud Beis regarding the Hasidic understanding of this topic of animals that are midbariyos versus animals that are bayoses. As you can just imagine, we're speaking about the animal soul, and muktzah, not muktzah. We'll see what that means on a deeper level. But let us begin on Daf Lamed Tes Amud Beis, beginning with the Mishnah. Mi shahoya peirosa be'ir acheres. You own produce. You own fruit. You live in LA, and let's say Topanga, just for the sake of argument, is outside the tchum. You did not make an eruv tchumen. If you would have made it, you would have been allowed to walk there. Says the Mishnah, ve'ervu b'nei oisa ha'ir. We have to read the Bach to get the words correctly. Lava yetzlei, people that live in Topanga, they made an eruv tchum because they want to visit you, who lives in LA. So they're thinking, if I'm going to you, I might as well bring you your peiros. Nah, says the Mishnah. I'm reading in the Bach, the version. Lo yaviu loy mi peirosav. They're not allowed to bring it because since the tchum of the peiros is bound by the tchum of the owner. If the owner did not make an eruv tchumen, so the peiros cannot go anywhere. However, I'm going back inside the Mishnah, the last line, ve'im eirav hu. But if the person made an eruv, so then peirosav kamayu, then yes, they may be brought. Okay, gavaldik. Number 2, Daf Mem on the top. If a person have invited guests, now the guests came from a town that's beyond the tchum, The guest made an eruv. They're going to go back. But certain people have an illness, this is a lot here in LA, that when someone goes to your house, they have to walk out taking your food. If not, they feel they're missing something. This happens a lot by us in the shul. It's amazing. It's a minig. I heard that it's called a doggy bag, something that dogs would do. Say however you word it. So the question is, can they take a doggy bag? No, they cannot, because if you come to my house, even though you made an eid of tchumen, so you can come to me and you can go back, I didn't make an eid of tchumen. You cannot take food that belonged to me when Yantav came in to your home if you live outside the tchum. The people that take doggy bags won't care about this, but the Mishnah is telling you the way it should be. So it says, they may not take back a mana, they take a gift. You ever heard that? Some people give gifts, some people take gifts. They cannot take gifts. Now, what happens if the host is very generous and he knows that if they're not going to take a gift, they're going to feel that they missed the whole experience? So what should he do? If he mamish transferred ownership to the guests from before Yom Tiv, they don't even have to be aware of it. As long as it's halachically theirs from before Yom Tiv, then of course, they made an eruv, which is why they are allowed to come, they are allowed to go back. Okay, that's the Mishnah, and now, like we quoted in the intro, one big topic. This is the topic, Itmer. Hamafkid peiros eitz lechaveri. Reuven deposited produce by Shimon. Alright, so Reuven is called the mafkid, the owner, and Shimon is called the shomer, or the custodian. Rav says, that happened before Yom Tiv. This item is bound by whose tchum? Rav says, Keragle mishev kiduloi. It is bound by the tchum of the custodian, even though he's not the owner. Shmuel says, no, Keragle hamafkid. It's bound by the tchum of the owner, of the depositor, and not by the shomer. So the Gemara initially wants to link this argument, Lema Rav and Shmuel, the Asdal Tamayut. The Havamina is, let's link it to the following Mishnah, Machloikes, where Rav and Shmuel opined with opposite sides that we have in Bava Kama. And there, we're speaking about the general rules of my responsibility over damages that my animal will do to your property. So one of the big questions that you have to ask is, where did that damage take place? Did the owner of the animal that damaged, or did the owner of the animal that got damaged, was that animal in a place where the animal was allowed to be? So says the Mishnah, that if I had permission to go to your house, I never spoke to you that I'm bringing my oxen to your house, but I had the reshus to go into your house. So im hichnes b'reshus, the moment you gave me permission to go to you, and I brought with me my animal, says the Chachamim, or the Tanakama, Bal hachotzer chayev, any damages that my animal will make is something that the owner of the location is going to be chayev. And we'll explain that, why is that in a moment. And Rebbe says, no. Lo'olam eino chayev at sheyekabel olav bal habayis lishmat. If the owner explicitly was told that the guest is coming with a donkey, the guest is coming with an ox, and the owner said, okay, I'll make sure that the ox is okay. If he undertook that responsibility, then he'll be chayiv. Otherwise, he won't be chayiv. Now, the marafuna, first to know, before we understand what is that machlokes, and we'll see how potentially it's very much connected to our machlokes, just be aware that Rav said halachic rivei chachamim. Don't forget, the Rav over here said that an item will follow the tchum of the custodian. There Rav says halach is like the chachamim, that the bal hachotzer, he doesn't own the animal, but let's say he's responsible for the animal because he invited him in with the knowledge that he's coming in with things. So this responsibility will make him enough owner for him to be chayiv in the damages. For him over here, like Rav is saying, for him to be, the tchum will go after the one who's responsible to guard it. And Shmuel says, halachi kenebi. So it's perfect. So therefore, Lema, let us say that Rav over here, right? Rav says that the tchum of an item follows the custodian. It fits with him paskening like the Chachamim. In other words, it's like you have total jurisdiction. You're chayev for damages, Itaka follows your tchum, and Shmuel, who says no, he says the tchum goes by the owner. It doesn't go by the custodian. That's why he paskins like Rebbe. Gavaldik. In other words, we're trying to say that whoever has jurisdiction is automatically going to assume the tchum. Says the Gemara, not necessarily so. Amalach Rav, Ana, I could even hold what I'm saying over here, that an item has the tchum of the custodian, even if I would have paskened like Rebbe, by saying that At kan loy ka'amar Rebbe hasam elo. The reason why Rebbe holds that the Bal HaChotzer is not responsible is because the bistame loy kibel olei nitirusa, because he never undertook that responsibility. Over here, when you asked me to guard something, to be a shomer, you want for me to take responsibility. And I, becoming a shomer, I'm taking that responsibility. Since the kabel alei nitirusa, that's why Rav says logically it should follow my tchum. I'm not the owner, but I'm the one responsible. Shmuel can argue on the opposite. I over here who hold that the items tchum will still follow the owner even while it's under the custodianship of another person with another tchum. I could say so even by paskening like the Rabbanan there in Bava Kama, by explaining At kan l'kamei Rabbanan hasam elo. The reason why the Chachamim hold that if I invite you into my house, it's a given, unless I specify otherwise, that I'm going to guard over you and your belongings, and I'm responsible for what your belongings do. That's my mindset. Now, do you consent to that? Of course, because that's to your betterment. The owner of the animal benefits by him, so to say, being relieved of his responsibility. The imazikle, because how is he relieved? Because taka, if that's the pshat, then when my animal, if it's going to damage in the other person's yard, the owner won't be mechayiv. In other words, the guest is happy to oblige the host's offer. But over here, by tchumen, listen, if I own something and I'm asking you to guard it, I don't want it to be bound by your tchum. I want to be able to collect it whenever I want. I don't want for it to lose my tchum. Okay. Bekitzer, so now that we said that they're not necessarily linked, still we have a machlokes between Rav and between Shmuel, and the Gemara is going to begin now by challenging Rav from our Mishnah. Now, the Gemara is not quoting the opening of the Mishnah, and the Tosfos and other Rishonim taka challenge why not, but clearly from the second case of the Mishnah is that if I have produce in someone else's city, away outside the 2,000 amas. But if I made an eruv, says the Mishnah, ve'im eruv hu, then my paytas can come back to me. Now, one second. If I have produce in another city, that means someone is guarding it. Rav says that my paytas follows the tchum of the shomer. How does it help for me, the owner, making an eruv? It doesn't follow my eruv. Says in the Mishnah, ve'im eruv hu, then payros of kamohu. Gavaldik, it's mamash against Rav. If something that is now being guarded by someone else, if someone is in someone else's property, it doesn't make a difference here. Then the rule is going to be, like Rav says, it now is bound by the tchum, by the shomer. Who cares if the owner made an eruv? It's not bound by my tchum. So answers the Gemara, the last narrow line, Amar Afuna, that they explain this in the yeshiva of Rav, that the case of our Mishnah must be Kigoin sheyichad loy keren zavius. Even Rav will agree that if I left my article in your house, but you gave me a corner that's designated for my article, it's almost as if I rented that corner from you. That part of real estate belongs to me. The items in that corner, are in my property. And even Rav will agree in such a case, they're bound by my tchum. When does Rav say that the item follows the tchum of the custodian? If it's take in the custodian's property. The moment the custodian designated an area like we do when we sell the chametz, we don't just sell the chametz, we lease the area in where the chametz is placed. Then it's completely out of the dominion of the custodian. Gavaldik. Tashema, another attempted question against Rav from our Mishnah. Top of the Amid, right? Going back to the top of the Amid, that Mishnah, if a person invited guests, the guests are coming from beyond the Tchum. The guest made an aid of Tchumen. The owner didn't. So then the Mishnah says, Lo yelichu b'yad manis. The guest may not take back a bag of food, a gift of food, because it belonged to me. Elim kain, zikolahem monesemer. Unless I gave it to them, I gifted it to them, I was mezakeh to them from before Yom Tov. But here again, my friends, if I say that this belongs to you, but it's still in my house, I'm the shomer. According to Rav, if I'm the shomer, it's still bound by my tchum. So how can you take it home? The amrat karagli mishav kidu etzlei, simple. Then kizikolahem alidei acher. Who cares? It should not make any difference. It's still, so to say, in the host's physical possession. So the Gemara answers a few answers. First of all, hachinami kiven shezicholhem alidei acher kimi sheyicholei kenzav yizdami. Why did I bequeath it to you? Why did I bequeath it to you? Because I want you to be able to take it. So the act of bequeathing something from you means that it's as if I mamish gave it over to you. The item with the property, and yes, and it's therefore going to be bound to your tchum. If you made an aid of tchumen, the fact that you came to me means you made an aid of tchumen, you can take it back. The iboy yisema zicha shani. Again, the fact that I was mezakeh it, even if I was not miyachad keren zavius, that Rav will agree that if my zikui was for you to take it home, you will be allowed to take it home. Okay, now the Gemara says a story. Rab Chana bar Chaniloi, and we learned about him, let's say in Masechta Brachas, right? He was a Jew that was doing a lot of mitzvahs. While doing mitzvahs, he was always learning. Chana bar Chaniloi, Tala Bisra ba'avra dedasha. He was from a different city. He came to this current city. He bought meat. He hung it, or it was hung for him on the hook of the door of his host's home. He made an eruv to go back home on Yom Tov. And the question is, was he allowed to carry the meat with him on Yom Tov? So he bought the meat, but he didn't have it in his hand. He had it on the door that belonged to his hosts. You can argue they are, so to say, responsible. They are the guardians. They are the custodians. So also the Kame de Rafuna, to find out whether he can walk back with the meat on Yom Tov, or Marley. So he says it depends. If you were the one that hung the meat on the door, then Zil Shekoil, then you can take it back. But if your hosts hung the meat on the door, then like tishkol. Now the Gemara wants to understand, why do we make such a difference? And let's remember that Rav Huna, who gave the psak, is a student of Rav. So he obviously will follow what we just learned above, that really it's bound by the tchum of the shomer. So the Gemara asks, Ve'i ihu tala, even if he's the one that hung it, it's not his home. So that means that the hosts have some responsibility over it, so they should be considered the shomer. Rav paskins that it follows the tchum of the shomer, so mishakal, how can he take it? Rav Huna is a Talmud de Rafu, v'amar Rav keragli mishav kidui etzloi. Answers the Gemara, Shani Avra de Dasha, that since he hung it on the door, these doors had hooks that were designated for people to hang stuff. So this is again like the Chemisha Yichol Keren Zav Yuzdami. It's like the hosts gave me the hook, gave Rab Chanan the hook. So not only did he own the item, but the location was loaned to him. And therefore, they're not even considered custodians, and even Rav will be moided that it follows the tchum of Rab Chanan. Now that only explained the first scenario, but now we're going to have many questions on the other side of the Psak Din. Amar Rafil Ravashi, question number one, but the inhu tali lay, but if they, the hosts, hung it, lay shakil, he can't take it, why not? Why not? Did we not learn above Gever and Daf Lamed Ches 2 dafim ago for Amar Shmuel Shor Shal Patam, that if someone makes a livelihood by selling animals, then whoever buys it, even on Yom Tiv, it follows the tchum of the purchaser. Because if I knew before Yom Tiv that I didn't know if I'm going to sell it, but I definitely wanted to sell it, I don't want to own it. Here the hosts put it for him, so it should be bound by his tchum. There should be no problem. Another question number 2. Again, why did Rafuna say that if they hung it up, loy shakil, he may not walk it home with him on Yom Tiv? The tchum was for him, but not for the meat. No. The halacha follows Rab Doisa. What does Rab Doisa say? That if a city only has one shepherd, and everyone knew from before Yom Tov that they will give their animal to the shepherd on Yom Tov day, even though it was in the possession of the owner, it's going to be bound by the tchum of the shepherd. Same concept. If I'm planning to give something to you, it's bound to your tchum, not to mine. Question number 3. Another question. Again, the Rafuna says that if the hosts were the ones that hung it, then Rab Chanan is not allowed to take it. Why? We learned, right, the beginning of the sugya was habehema v'hakelim keragli haba'olim. Rashi says that they are not considered shoymrim. Not called shoymrim. It belongs to Rab Chanan. This is the classical din that a thing is bound by the tchum of the owner. So they don't like what is Rafuna saying. 3 questions. So the Gemara says, Ella, you misunderstood the whole psak din. It has nothing to do with tchumen. Nothing to do with chulin. It's a whole different thing. Guys, we learned in chulin, when it comes to meat, basar shenes alem min ha'ayin, this halacha is a halacha for today. If you bought meat, but there was a while when it was not supervised, there is a fear that the meat, the kosher meat that you left, was taken away. The meat that you found is another meat. If you recognize the meat, then there's no problem. If the meat was wrapped, no problem. V'chulei. Rab Chanan was unique. Rab Chanan was a person that even when he bought meat in a butcher's shop, lav dafke he would ever recognize that meat, because he was constantly learning. Says the Gemara, Shani Rab Chana bar Chaniloi, the Gavra Rabahu. He was a great man. Great man meaning, not a great man because he spent 18 hours a day in the Beis Midrash. He was a great man that even when he was in the market, his feet were in the market, his head was in Torah. V'taret b'shmaitze. He can buy something and not even know what he bought. Now, v'hachi ka'amar, this is what Rafuna says. I'at talit, when you hang the meat up, you're handling it. It's more than just buying it. If you hung it up, then islach simana b'gavei. You took note, at least at that moment you saw it. Once you saw it, you'll remember. Then we're not concerned that even though it was left unsupervised, you'll recognize it. People remember something if they noticed it at least once. Then zil shkoil. But if other people hung the meat up for you, unique, then maschat daitach. You never notice the meat. Don't take it, not because of tchum, because maybe the meat is not even the kosher meat. Maybe it's some treifa meat that was replaced with the kosher meat. Gavaldik. Okay, Chevra, now we are learning the final Mishnah in the Masechta. The Mishnah speaks about watering animals, but it's clear, and we learned this on Daf Chav Gimel Amud Beis and Rashi, we are obligated to feed our animals, unless the animals have food in nature. Remember the fish, you don't have to feed your fish, not fish in your fish tank because in the fish in a pond. So feeding, food, water, if I own an animal, I'm not even allowed to eat before I feed them. The Mishnah is speaking about shechting. It also, as the Gemara will point out, that's a good advice, that when people shecht an animal, and one of the first things you do is that you take off the skin, you skin it. If the animal would drink liquid prior to shechita, it's going to be a lot easier to skin it. That's just a side thing. Says the Mishnah, Ein mashkin v'shechten. You may not water and shecht. It's about shechting. Animals that are called midbariyos, range animals, even though you own it. If the animal is not living with you, as we'll define better, it's set aside from your mind, it's not muchand, it's not prepared, it's muksa. You can't shecht it. Avol mashkin v'shechten es habayosois. Domesticated animals could be watered and slaughtered. Now, how do you define bayosois? How do you define midbariyos? Says the Mishnah, Elohein bayosois halonis be'ir. If animals, even if during the day they go out and pasture, if they come back and sleep in the city, they're called domesticated animals. Not even in your property, in the city. Midbariyos, literally it means the desert, are animals halonis ba'afar. They sleep in the pasture. They don't even come back to sleep in the city. It has to do with where they sleep. Okay, so first of all, the Gemara wants to know, the topic of the Mishnah is just to introduce that even though we are allowed to shecht on Yom Tov, but if the animal was completely out of your mind, it's muktzah. Why did the Mishnah speak about watering it? And as we explained, it's not an animal has to be fed if it needs you to feed it, if it's yours. So the Gemara says, we're teaching something on the side, that the lashke inish behemta, it's better for a person first to give water to one's animal and right afterwards to shecht it, mishum sircha de mashcha, in order for the mashcha, for the hide, not to adhere too tightly to the skin. You're going to have a harder time skinning it. In reverse, if it drank a lot of liquid, that liquid was not yet absorbed in the body. So therefore, it's going to help you skin it with greater ease. Now, our Mishnah gave a very simple sign or a rule how to define midbariyos versus bayosos, but now we're going to elaborate. Tanach Rabbanim, we learned in the Beitzah, Elohein midbariyos ve'elohein bayosos. What animals are considered range animals? What animals are considered domesticated animals? Midbariyos, says the Beitzah, kol sheyotzos ba'Pesach, if they go out to the fields in the beginning of spring, Pesach time, v'royos ba'afar, and they sleep mamish, they don't even come back, they sleep in the pasture, they only come back during the first rain season, which happens to be in the month of Mar Cheshvan. That's called midbariyos. Even though during the rain season they hang out in the city, but if they're out there from Pesach until Mar Cheshvan, however, ve'elin bayosos, kol sheyotzes v'royos chutz l'tchum, but the boys v'lonis b'techat tchum, they can go out every single day. But if they come back and sleep inside the tchum, not even in the city, in the tchum of the city, that's called domesticated. Rebbe Yomer, everything you mentioned is still called bayosos. Everything is called bayosos. What is midbariyos? Called sheyotzos v'royos ba'afar, animals that go out to the pasture. Ve'ein nechnosis le'yishuv, they never come back home. Not during the summer and not during the winter. Even though legally you own them, those are the animals that are muktzah. Now, the fact that Rebbe is debating what is midbariyos, it means that he consents, he agrees to the principle that if an animal is midbariyos, however you define it, then you may not shecht it on Yom Tov. Problem is, that will only be valid, that's only correct according to Rebbe Yehuda, that subscribes to the broader application of muktzah. Rab Shimon, who is very limited in his application of muktzah, and our question is that L'choyre Rebbe holds like Rab Shimon, won't agree with any of this. So what if the animal is out of your sight? Doesn't matter. You never made a conscious decision not to use it on Yom Tov. You just never thought about it. According to Rab Shimon, that's not muktzah. So fragting about the fact that Rebbe is giving a detailed opinion regarding how you define midbariyos, which again L'choyre implies that he agrees with the principle, Umi Isle Rebbe muktzah. No, the last line in the Amid, Rab Shimon bar Rebbe, the son of Rebbe, Rab Shimon, asked his father Rebbe. Now his question was regarding Patzi'ile Tamarim, unripe dates. There are certain dates that they'll never become ripe on the tree. I have in my house over here, avocado tree, they never are ripe on the tree. You have to take them out, you have to put them in a bag. Here, these dates, you have to put them in a basket. Now while they are in the basket, they are, let's say, they're quasi-edible. They're not complete. They're already in the basket, but they need time in the basket. So he asked his father, am I allowed to eat those dates on Shabbos or on Yom Tov? Again, they're not fully completed. And Amalei, to which Rebbe responded, Ein muktzah l'Rab Shimon. That enachanami, this is really the machlokes Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, and he says, according to Rabbi Shimon, it's not muktzah. What is muktzah? Ella groi grois v'tzemukim bilvad. As we learned, when you had a fruit that was completed, like a fig, when it's moist, like a grape, when it's ready, you chose to dry it. While it's drying, it becomes unfit until it's fully dried. Something that's fit, and you set aside for it not to be used for a certain period of time, that is muktzah. Other than that, these dates were never fit, and you made them unfit. They were never ripe. Now they are in the middle of getting ready. They're a little bit ready. According to Rab Shimon, it's not muktzah. It sounds like Rebbe agrees with this. So according to Rebbe, you should be allowed to shecht midbariyos however they're defined. So the Gemara gives a few answers. Answer number one is Iba Yisema Hani Nami Kegreges Tzimukam Dami. In other words, since they were in the city when you bought them, and they were sent away even only once, even according to Rab Shimon, muktzah. The Iba Yisema L'dvarav the Rab Shimon Kamalei V'leilei Sviralei. Who says he paskins like Rab Shimon? He told his son that according to Rab Shimon, the unripe grapes are not as bad as the semi-dried figs and raisins. That indeed, Rebbe holds like Rab Shimon. There is no muktzah. All he's telling the Chachamim regarding their definition of what's midbariyos and what's bayasos, lididi and achanami ein muktzah. Lididchu, but even according to you, you follow Rabbi Yehuda, but you're giving you have to define it differently. Admit to me that the that even if they only come back a few months in the year, but they come back a little bit, it's still called domesticated. And on that, the Chachamim disagree. And we'll read the words when we make the Siyum. Now listen to the inner meaning of this whole topic, and I'm going to quote a few words, Pashat, from a Fabrengen, from Chav Dalet Tevis Tafshin Yud Beis in Toiras Menachem on page 254. So the Rebbe was saying like this, that we're speaking about a behema, the animal soul. By Yasois, as we learned in the Mishnah, what's a domesticated animal soul? An animal that comes to sleep at home. Which means, I'm using the words of the Rebbe, that Simen hakoiveyas achilug midbariyas ubayosis umakoim li nasan. Where do they sleep? If the animal sleeps in the midbar, that's a siman that he's a midbariyos. Which means she'ein aleim balabais. The animal is such an animal, it doesn't want to accept any rulership. He wants to be free. Avda behefkeda nichalei. In other words, a completely unrectified nefesh habahamis is called midbariyos. That's the meaning now. Muktzah, it's fech, it's disgusting. It's muktzah. Bayasois is an animal that comes home to sleep, even if during the day the animal is a wilde chaya, but epes at night you say Kriya Shema, there's a certain moment where you accept the balabatishkeit of someone greater than the animal, which is the godly soul. Based on this, it's beautiful what's going on over here. Rebbe, let's go as the Rebbe. In other words, how do you view a person whose animal is on fire? You're going to say muktzah. Look how Rebbe limits muktzah. Koydem kol, Rebbe says, even if the animal for many months in the year, during summer, people's animal soul is on fire. If at least during winter you come home to sleep, you're already not muktzah. Then the ending is, the end of the Masechta is that the Rebbe, if you're connected to the Rebbe's wissen sein, that even if the animal never comes home to sleep, Rebbe holds an animal is never muktzah. Because when you're connected to a Rebbe, we have to do our own avodah. We're not giving away our avodah. But connected to the Rebbe means that there is a balabas over me. It's going to connect us to God in a way that even if the animal never likes to come home to sleep, it's never muktzah. There's always hope. Even that nefesh habahamis should not be set aside. The adarabah, you got to bring it in with the avodah of iskafia, but ultimately there'll be the success of the hisapcha, and even the behema will become transferred to kedusha. With this we say that we concluded the final Perek, that we finished, God, with Hashem's help, Masechtas Beitzah, and God willing, next year we will start learning Masechtas Rosh Hashanah.